Aaron Mate is one of the leading journalists in our day and age. He is one of the dauntless few that has been speaking truth to power. Aaron Mate is, again, a man who has not only been on the front lines, especially doing groundbreaking journalism, but has been proven factually correct on many of the topics in regards to war, U.S. involvement, and how corporate media fails to tell the whole story. And what is shocking to me and what is really enraging me right now is that he was recently on a debate stage. It's only right now, as it stands on my refreshing, it's only got 1,000 views. But in this opening remark, and this was an opening remark to debate, and what I'm going to do for this clip is link this clip, the YouTube link, so all of you can watch a debate in its full entirety. It's about 1 hour and 30 minutes, plus an additional 33 seconds, of talking about the push for peace in Ukraine, Eli Lake versus Aaron Mate. And I want to play the opening statement of Aaron Mate and how he perfectly sums up the war in Ukraine and how it got started, because there has been some fallout, especially with some recent military actions that have taken place. And we all know that the Trump administration is trying to broker a peace deal in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. And we will see if that peace happens. But I got to tell you, with the amount of time Trump's been taking in getting a peace deal, this has been more than 24 hours. So let's go ahead and play this video. Huge shout out to Aaron Mate. When I clip this video, available to all of you, the link to the YouTube debate will be in the description box below. Please boost up the numbers to it because it is criminally underviewed.
Thank you to the organizers, Hekmat, Abu Hader, Civil, Young Voices, for putting this together. And thank you to everyone who's here in person and watching this at home. In addressing the question before us, it's important to make a distinction between provoked and justified. To argue that Russia's invasion is justified, one has to meet a very high burden that I believe Russia has not met. But when it comes to the issue at hand, whether Russia was provoked, I think there's an overwhelming case that the answer is yes. And this is the question I think should most concern those of us in NATO states, because our governments, I will argue, are behind the provocation and accordingly a major geopolitical disaster that needs to come to an end. The provocation of Russia, in my view, has four main elements: expanding the NATO military alliance to Russia's borders, tearing up vital arms control treaties, installing military assets that threaten Russia's security, and finally, and most fatefully, meddling in countries on Russia's doorstep, primarily Ukraine. Let's start with the most uncontroversial issue, which is NATO expansion. It's now widely accepted that in the talks to end the Cold War, the Soviet Union was promised that NATO, in the words of Secretary of State James Baker, would expand not 1 inch eastward. Now, one could argue, well, too bad, this pledge was never made in writing, and it's true, there was no formal treaty. But then the question becomes, why violate this verbal pledge to not expand NATO, and was it worth it? Well, on the question of why, we know the answer from the U.S. architects of NATO expansion. In October 1994, a Clinton National Security Council memo formally endorsed NATO expansion into Ukraine and other former Soviet countries. The memo argued for expansion on the basis of what it called a, quote, insurance policy, strategic hedge rationale, i.e. neo-containment of Russia. But this goal will be kept in the background only, rarely articulated. In other words, we'll tell the public that NATO expansion is about freedom, self-defense, democracy, and keep our real goal, the neo-containment of Russia, in the background. Now, not everybody was on board. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot argued that pursuing a, quote, strategy of preemptive containment would be a catastrophic mistake. Our policy would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is mainly because, Talbot said, quote, the prospect of NATO expansion provokes some of the most basic Russian reflexes to twitch, their fear rooted in geography and history of encirclement and exclusion. Bill Clinton ignored this warning, and as he further enlarged NATO, many other prominent diplomats, including George Kennan, one of the most authoritative diplomats in U.S. history, issued similar pleas that went ignored. Expanding NATO, Kennan wrote, would be the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. Now, when it comes to Ukraine in particular, why would this be such a fateful error? Well, Ukraine is integral to Russia's history and identity. Kyiv is known as the mother of Russian cities. Ukraine and other former Soviet states contain sizable ethnic Russian-speaking minorities. This issue was laid out by George W. Bush's ambassador to Russia, William Burns, most recently the director of the CIA, in a very important 2008 cable. He relayed fears from inside Russia that NATO expansion into Ukraine, quote, could potentially split the country in two, leading to violence or even, some claim, civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene. Given that possibility, Burns predicted, inviting Ukraine into NATO will create fertile soil for Russian meddling in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Well, just as Bill Clinton did, George W. Bush ignored this high-level and prescient warning. At the 2008 NATO summit in Romania, the Bush administration pushed through a pledge that Ukraine and Georgia will one day join NATO. It's important to stress here that Bush was not just ignoring the advice of veteran diplomats and some of his own advisors like Fiona Hill, but crucially, Ukrainian public opinion. Roderick Lyne, who is the UK's former ambassador to Russia, said this: "It was stupid on every level at that time. If you want to start a war with Russia, that's the best way of doing it." Moreover, any poll in Ukraine showed that 2/3 of the Ukrainian public did not want NATO membership, unquote. That longtime Ukrainian public position reflected Ukraine's founding declaration of state sovereignty, which affirmed Ukraine's, quote, intention of becoming a permanently neutral state that does not participate in military blocs, unquote.
I want to pause here because I want to just pull up just a couple of things here. First of all, there is still ongoing communication between Trump and, of course, Putin as well. They've been playing a game of phone tag. Obviously, it's very clear that we are witnessing the aftermath of the failure of the Biden-Harris administration that allowed this war to get out of hand. Now, what have we seen here? We've seen the Zelensky and his administration, even Zelensky himself, admit that there is no accountability for the money lost. He doesn't know where it's at. Now, if you were to say that to some, well, shady organizations that are known for snapping some legs in two or these or that, giving you some concrete shoes to swim at the bottom of the lake, especially here in Lake Michigan, let's just say it wouldn't go too well. But one has to wonder where the money go. The amount of treasury and lives lost and people on edge for the sequel we've all been dreading for, World War III, is an ongoing and continuous stress that none of us want to live through, but yet this is something and a legacy that the Biden-Harris administration have given us. We have to remember that this whole idea of this war was nothing more than a reaction to many things that have been laid before 2022, such as the 2014 coup that took place. Oh, and how can we ever forget that Coca-Cola classic Russiagate and Trump and Putin and Russia somehow rigged the first of the election in 2016 and somehow it's all Russia's fault. And this was the natural reaction of having Trump derangement syndrome, Russian phobia, and all of this other stuff. Now, in no way will I ever make Trump or Putin a saint, but I got to tell you, folks, the way Biden and his administration systematically allowed for this war to escalate, to allow the first bullet to be fired, is a failure of this administration. And it's going to be very difficult for a peace to be achieved because Zelensky's used to getting that money. Now, we saw Zelensky and Trump have a blow up and fight in the White House. We saw them argue. The cards are not in anyone's favor, especially with the looming threat of World War III. And I really hate pulling this up here. I really do. But I want to pull up this article here as well, because we're going to continue on with the rest of the video uninterrupted. I don't want to interrupt the rest of part of the video. I'm going to let it play out its full entirety, because all of you need to hear it and see it. I'm going to also play a second part of the video as well, and I will give the link to the full debate in the description box below, because it is criminally underviewed, and Aaron Mate is being the buzzsaw, as he should be, because gas metering station attack, an act of terrorism, Russia's investigative committee has found. So this just recently happened. Russia's investigative committee has classified the attack on the Sudas gas metering station on the border with Ukraine as an act of terrorism and launched a criminal probe, according to a statement. The incident in the Kursk region took place early on Friday. The facility had been previously used to deliver natural gas from Russia via Ukraine to consumers in European nations. Ha! Another pipeline gone. What happened? Now, we all know right now that Trump is trying to do a peace deal, and it ain't happening. Why? Because there's money to be made, profits, because before the first act of the invasion took place, when the military movements were happening, when Russia was responding, what do you think our fantastic politicians in the United States Senate and House did? Democrat and Republican. Did they call Biden, wake him up from his 12-hour nap and say, we need to have diplomatic envoys and stop this war before the first round is fired? No. Our politicians made a killing. Financially, that is. Check out Unusual Whales and see how well your favorite politician did in their portfolio in 2022. It's bloody brilliant, no pun intended. The rest of Aaron Mate.
Well, that pesky problem of Ukraine's founding constitution and Ukrainian public opinion was overcome in 2014 with the ouster of Ukraine's democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, in the Maidan coup. Now here, the standard narrative is that Yanukovych was a Russian puppet ousted by a massive popular movement known as the Maidan because Yanukovych turned away from the European Union and NATO to align closer with Russia. In reality, Yanukovych wanted to maintain ties to both Russia and the West. For this reason, he ruled out Ukraine's entry into NATO while still holding talks about joining the EU in an economic deal. The problem with the EU deal is not that Yanukovych was ordered by Russia to ignore it, but Yanukovych actually read the fine print. And what did it say? That he'd have to embrace harsh austerity measures and curtail ties to Russia, which would have been a disaster in particular for Yanukovych's base in East and Southeastern Ukraine. Now, meanwhile, the Maidan coup that overthrew Yanukovych was led not by the peaceful protesters who went out to Maidan, but by powerful and small in number but large in force Ukrainian ultra-nationalists, including some neo-Nazis, who lacked the support of a majority of Ukrainians, as polls from that time affirm. As two specialists with prominent Western think tanks wrote in Foreign Policy magazine 1 month after Yanukovych was overthrown, the uncomfortable truth is that a sizable portion of Kyiv's current government and the protesters who brought it to power are indeed fascists. Leading the fascist contingent in the Maidan was Ole Tyahnybok of the Svoboda Party. Now, 1 year earlier, the European Parliament had condemned what it called Svoboda's racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic views and urged Ukrainian political parties not to associate with, endorse, or form coalitions with this party. Well, one very important party ignored the European Parliament's advice, and that was the US government. Victoria Nuland of the State Department, Senators John McCain and Chris Murphy were among those to fly to the Maidan and cavort around with Tyahnybok and other fascist leaders around the Maidan. McCain and Murphy openly talked about bringing about a transition. And when that transition was finally achieved with Yanukovych's ouster, Murphy took credit. He said that it was our role in part that helped lead to this change in regime. What was that role? Well, we know from the infamous intercepted phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piet that the US was helping to pick which leaders from the Maidan should join the new government. This reflected the key influence that the US had won by spending millions of dollars via USAID, the NED, and US-friendly billionaires. Accordingly, when the fascist elements of the Maidan sabotaged a power-sharing agreement that had been negotiated by fellow Maidan members that would have left Yanukovych briefly in power, the Obama administration forgot that it had supported the power-sharing agreement and immediately recognized the new coup government that overthrew Yanukovych. What happened after that? The new coup government turned its focus on Ukraine's ethnic Russian population, effectively trying to ban the Russian language and tolerating deadly assaults on ethnic Russians, including in Odessa. In response, Eastern Ukrainians launched an armed rebellion with Moscow's support. The Kremlin meanwhile seized Crimea, which hosted its most important naval base. How did the US respond to this? By encouraging more violence. April 2014, John Brennan goes to Kyiv, tells the Ukrainian government, hey, you should launch an operation against the Donbass, we'll back you up. That's exactly what Ukraine did 1 day later. Russia then ramped up its support for the rebels, finally militarily intervening directly in August 2014. This fighting leads to the Minsk Accords, which was premised on Ukraine agreeing to recognize limited autonomy for the Donbass, and the rebels would disarm. Well, again, two powerful constituencies ignored this. Ukraine's ultranationalists, who implemented what the Ukrainian-American journalist Lev Golinkin calls a policy of veto through violence. Every time the Ukrainian government took steps to implement Minsk, the Ukrainian fascists held violent protests. And they were joined in their opposition by powerful U.S. officials. Victoria Nuland privately schemed to undermine Minsk. William Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine at the time, told Volodymyr Zelensky, who had been elected on a platform of peace, that implementing Minsk is, quote, a terrible idea. When Biden took power, Zelensky was encouraged to be more belligerent, culminating in the days before Russia's invasion, when Zelensky's government was openly saying, forget Minsk, we're never going to implement it. Now, when Russia invaded, that forced Zelensky into his rejection of Minsk, and you had peace talks, culminating in the Istanbul Accords of April 2022. We know that there was a deal almost reached. That's because Ukrainians told us that. Alexander Chaly, a senior member of the Ukrainian delegation, said this: we managed to find a very real compromise. Well, what happened to the compromise? Boris Johnson came over to Kyiv on behalf of the US and told Zelensky that he would not be backed up if he made a peace deal with Russia. Now, on top of sabotaging peace opportunities like the Minsk Accords and the Istanbul Accords, and also expanding NATO to Russia's borders, these dangers have been compounded by the U.S. systematically dismantling arms control treaties, most significantly the ABM Treaty and the INF Treaty. No longer constrained by such agreements, the U.S. has placed advanced weapon systems closer to Russian territory, all while ramping up military exercises, naval activity. Russia tried to address these issues in its December 2021 proposal to the U.S. and NATO, which was effectively rejected. So, in conclusion, by expanding NATO, ignoring the warnings of high-level Western officials, dismantling arms control, meddling in Ukraine's government, building up
Truth Wire. All right. That's also our friends Pasta, Jamie, and Fiorella. Good to see you guys. This took place on a debate yesterday by CIVL. It's a YouTube channel. Right now, the views for this debate between Eli Lake and Aaron Mate. This is just Aaron Mate's opening statement, but I think it's important for us to hear it because the full debate, which for some reason, I don't know why it's criminally underviewed. It's like right now, apparently it has under 1,000 views. It is talking about pushing for peace in Ukraine. Can the war come to an end? And this was Aaron Mate's opening monologue. So shout out to Truth Wire. Let's play the rest of it. There's a few seconds left in here.
CIA bases inside of Ukraine. And finally, blocking a diplomatic settlement multiple times. The U.S. and NATO have absolutely provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's finally time to put an end to this carnage and embrace the peaceful alternatives that have long been undermined. Thank you.
We'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Now, again, huge shout out to Aaron Mate, but there's a little bit more here that I want to play because I think it's important for Aaron Mate and everybody else to see this video, or either that, more importantly, hear Aaron Mate speak in regards to this. That was his opening statement about how the war got started, why it was a complete disaster, especially for it to be ongoing and continuous while we are all on edge for the sequel we've been dreading, WW3. And I'm very grateful to my Discord and viewing audience, people who also message me and say, hey, Kit, check this out. Hey, Kit, look at this. Because without all of you, Hardlands Media would not exist, because this whole entire debate, and I posted a link in the YouTube live stream. Please, everybody, I'll post it again here for YouTube. And when I clip this video, I will also be putting it in the description box so everyone can see it as well. I'm urging everyone to please share the link, support the link, do whatever you can to spread it on out, because Aaron Mate is the buzzsaw. He is delivering, and I want to play the rest of this right here because there's a little bit more. It's like at the halfway, not a little bit before the halfway point, 24 minutes in of Aaron Mate being the buzzsaw, as he should. Let's raise up the volume and play it.
Backing a coup. It's pretty clear now that the U.S. backed that coup. That's why, again, when there was a power sharing agreement that would have left Yanukovych in power, the U.S. said that they supported this publicly. As soon as it was sabotaged, they forgot about that and welcomed the new changing government. Chris Murphy, as I said, took credit for it. There's plenty of more anecdotal evidence. Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, reported that there was high fives around after Yanukovych was overthrown.
But you're acknowledging that there was no stepped up training and CIA operations before. No, I mean that there wasn't. There was Ukraine's entire defense industrial base was the U.S. did not really get involved until after 2014.
They got involved. Well, first of all, I believe in fomenting the coup, backing it with supporting the opposition.
I'm happy to take that on too.
Television networks like propped up out of nowhere that were financed by the U.S. right as the Maidan erupted. This is classic covert stuff. Now, on the day after the coup, the new intelligence chief in Ukraine told the New York Times in the article last year, which reported that there were 12 CIA bases inside of Ukraine built up since 2014. He said that on the day after the coup, his first day on the job, who did he call first? The CIA station chief and his MI6 counterpart. And they established a relationship immediately, cementing Ukraine's new status as a U.S. proxy. That was a threat to Russia, which Russia responded to.
Aaron, do you have a question for Eli?
This is a hypothetical. I mean, if a similar scenario had played out inside Mexico or Canada, where Russia helped back a change of government and then integrate Canada or Mexico into a hostile military alliance, how do you think we would have reacted?
I reject the premise of your question because I think that what we saw in the Maidan Revolution was people power at work, and
people power. Okay. All right. People power. Even though there are many reports showing that there was involvement from certain letter agencies, but don't look too much into it, folks. It might blow your mind.
And as for this notion that there was an actual coup, if you look at the accounts at the time, Yanukovych left and his bodyguards sort of disappeared. There wasn't, he wasn't.
By the way, body language 101. When your arms are folded like this, you're defensive. Notice, Aaron Mate, calm, cool, collective, right? Not moving. This boy right here, he's swinging his legs. Swinging his legs. Swinging his legs. All right? And AB says, coward won't answer. Be nice. Patrick D, this moron has zero facts. Everybody be nice. All right? And you know something? Be like Natalie Williams. Guys, the CIA are people too. They are. Yes, they're spying in on you all the time, every time.
Forced out. There wasn't a military general who
quit swinging your leg,
gun at his head and said, "You've got to leave now." He left, and to the shock and surprise of the European negotiators at the time, who were working to basically end a kind of standoff. And also, in your telling of this, so why don't you talk about the fact that there were military snipers shooting at random into a crowd of protesters? That was another escalation on the part of the Yanukovych side of it. So, the vast majority of the violence, there's some violence coming from the other side. It's never 100%, but most of the violence was coming from the pro-Yanukovych forces. So again, I would say that all of these things are kind of reactions to, at first, this sort of situation, which got worse because of the poor handling and the violence that was introduced, after the events in 2013. And then after Russia invades, you see the opera. You see it becomes some
bad cookies. This guy looks like George Costanza with Down syndrome. Get up, go see the White House counselor. I want you to tell the White House counselor what you just said. Go now.
Somewhat operational. And again, Obama still refused to formally give weapons to the Ukrainians in that situation. So yeah, I'm sure Ukraine's intelligence chief called the CIA station chief. That happens all the time. As for Toria Nuland and Gregory Pyatt, we have a snippet of a conversation that the Russians bugged and then released to the world. Do you not think that those kinds of conversations are happening all the time with every other European diplomats? I mean, I would have loved to have the U.S. use its NSA capabilities on Russian, conversations, and we don't. Ordering the elected president of his neighbor not to take the trade agreement, which he had campaigned on and was done after years of negotiation. So you're obsessed with America somehow violating the sovereignty of Ukraine. What about Russia's violations of the sovereignty of Ukraine, which are out in the open for all to see?
Well, again, I think that Russia's primary violation of Ukrainian sovereignty was the invasion, which I do think was an illegal crime. But my argument is that it was provoked. Now, addressing some specific points, Eli mentioned the Maidan massacre, snipers firing down on the crowds. I'll refer you to Ivan Kachanovsky. He's a Ukrainian-Canadian professor, University of Ottawa, written peer-reviewed studies on this. His contention is that the snipers were on the pro-Maidan side. He cites forensic evidence, Ukrainian court records. I'll post some of his evidence online after this. When it comes to Obama, it's true. Obama was very reluctant to do all of this because that was very obvious. In fact, on his way out the door, he argued to Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic that if people want to go fight a war on behalf of Ukraine, they should speak up and talk about it. And in fact, it's stupid for us to do that because whatever we do, Russia will always outmatch what we do. So why should we do that? The problem was he was undermined from within by people like Victoria Nuland. At the Munich Security Conference, right as the Minsk two Accords were being brokered, Victoria Nuland had a meeting with people like John McCain, Mike Pompeo, and she basically dismissed the Europeans. She dismissed the Minsk Accords as Angela Merkel's Moscow thing. She was very contemptuous of the Minsk Accords. And by the way, later on, Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, who helped broker the Minsk Accords, said that it was all a ruse, that it was an effort to stall for time to give Ukraine time to rearm and prepare for a war with Russia. I actually don't believe that Merkel meant that. I think she was just trying to appease pro-war sentiment after Russia invaded. But the fact that they felt that her and Hollande felt compelled to say that speaks to the hostility to diplomacy that exists inside the NATO alliance. And finally, in terms of Nuland's phone call, what business does the U.S. have deciding who should be in and out of government? It reflects that the U.S. had made.
Hold on, there are some pauses here because
that
video's still playing. Video's still playing.
The prime minister of the new Ukrainian government, nominated by members of Svoboda. Returning to an earlier point, the new government did not reflect the peaceful protesters. And I agree with you, there are many of them who were liberal-minded, who wanted genuine ties to the West, but that was not what drove ultimately the coup. That was the hardline fascist element that sabotaged their comrades' power-sharing agreement with U.S. backing, and they were the ones who took over under this new coup government.
Okay, can I?
Now, here's what I'm going to do. All right. Now, I did post a link to the full debate in of course the in the live stream chat, and when I clip this video, I want everyone to go to the description box after you're done liking and commenting on our video, of course, us giving a commentary on this, to please view that interview, that entire debate in its full entirety. It is criminally underviewed, and I hope that everyone spreads and shares the word about how Aaron Mate was a buzzsaw, because we have to look at the entire horrific landscape that is the war in Ukraine. Countless lives have been lost. Money spent. Money gone. Money that could have been used to, I don't know, uplift American citizens. See, this is the problem when you have a government, both Democrats and Republicans, constantly implementing policies of regime change, wars, coups, and sanctions, and all the while the game of WW3 hangs in the balance because one wrong move, and who knows how either side will react. Now, this is a mess that Donald Trump has to clean up, and I want to be clear on this. I don't care who's president. Right now, it's Trump, but I sure hope that he's able to be successful in making a peace deal. But at least as it stands, there's still military actions going on. Ukraine is still launching attacks, and I get it. I understand. But now the guns have to become silent. A peace deal has to be written out. But yet we have to look at why the war got started. Because of our involvement. And no, Putin is no saint. He is no angel. I will not say that. But there does come a point to where you don't instigate a conflict that could lead to consequences and repercussions, such as the extinction of humanity. And I'll say that again, the extinction of humanity. This is a game in which you don't want to have global superpowers wondering that shiny red button and doing this, even though it's a button for Coca-Cola. I don't want this to happen.
Say if I press this, it's the end of the world.
Yeah, I don't want the end of the world to happen. I don't want that to happen at all, period. So Aaron Mate is leading with facts. He has been proven correct on every single one of his stories, such as the conflict in Gaza, the conflict in Syria, and now this conflict in Ukraine. And notice that the great defenders, especially way back in 2022, all the people who were hyping up Zelensky, the war in Ukraine, and everything else, notice how awfully quiet they are. Notice how they're saying, while they're squirming. They can't come to terms with the fact that they helped promote and sell a ridiculous war that never should have happened. There was only one winner, though. Well, winners. And that's those politicians that made a huge financial killing. Check out Unusual Whales. Shout out to Aaron Mate. Shout out to everybody that's has been made aware of this. This video, that whole entire debate was dropped yesterday.